Has Ferrari really just discovered something about Lewis Hamilton that could completely change the balance within the team and leave Charles Leclerc in a position that no one expected? Because what happened at Fiorano was not a simple test. It was the moment when everything within Ferrari began to change. It all begins with a scene that, on the surface, should not have generated any kind of headlines. A tire test, controlled conditions, artificial rain in Fiorano, and a technical program completely limited by regulations. Ferrari was not there to look for performance, nor to compare times, much less to draw sporting conclusions. But in Formula One, there are days where the important thing is not what you are authorized to do, but what really happens on the track. In this context, Lewis Hamilton gets on the SF26 at a very specific moment in the season. A key break between Japan and Miami, where each kilometer accumulated can make enormous differences. And here is the first critical point that Ferrari begins to notice internally, because while other drivers use this type of session simply to stay active, Hamilton turns each lap into an extension of his adaptation process, accelerating it in a way that was not anticipated by the team. What begins to attract attention is not only its rhythm, but the way in which it arrives at it. In rainy conditions, where the car is more unpredictable, where confidence is everything and where any mistake is costly, Hamilton shows immediate comfort. There is no hesitancy, there is no typical period where a driver tests limits little by little. From the beginning, his driving reflects control, grip reading, and a sensitivity that begins to stand out lap after lap. Ferrari, which had already been analyzing its adaptation process since the beginning of the season, found something unexpected. The data does not tell the story of a driver under construction, but of one who already understands the car. And this is where the impact begins to grow within the team, because it is not just a question of specific speed, it is consistency. Hamilton doesn't just set good records, he repeats them, sustains them, and turns them into a reliable foundation to work from. This detail completely changes the internal perception of the SF26. Until then, Ferrari was still in a phase where the car had to be figured out, where there were open questions about its behavior in different conditions. But Hamilton begins to close those unknowns faster than expected, delivering a quality of feedback that Vasseur describes as exceptional, something that within the hermetic context of Ferrari has enormous weight. And while all this is happening, there is one figure who watches with special attention: Charles Leclerc. Because although the Monégasque continues to be the team's natural reference, what he is seeing in Fiorano does not fit with a teammate in the process of adaptation. What you're seeing is a driver starting to gel too quickly, too well, and in an area where Hamilton has historically been lethal: complicated conditions. Here the first silent tension of the story is born. It is not an open rivalry, there are no cross statements, but there is a reality that is beginning to be built within the team. Ferrari is no longer waiting for Hamilton. Hamilton is already ready. And that completely changes the starting point of the season for both drivers. At the same time, Vasseur plays a key role in how this situation is managed. Because while internally the data generates enthusiasm, externally the message is content. Ferrari does not want to create uncontrolled expectations, it does not want to feed a narrative that could turn against it later. But precisely that caution is what confirms that something important is happening. Because in Formula One, when a team like Ferrari decides not to exaggerate something positive, it is usually because the real impact is much greater than what they are willing to show. And so, what seemed like a simple technical test at Fiorano becomes the first clear indication that the balance within Ferrari is beginning to shift. A silent, progressive change, but potentially decisive for everything that comes after. From that moment on, everything within Ferrari enters a new dimension, because what seemed like a simple surprise begins to transform into a strategic concern, and also a historic opportunity. The Fiorano test stops being an isolated event and becomes an internal reference, a point of comparison that inevitably begins to affect the way in which the team interprets its present and, above all, its immediate future. The focus is no longer solely on what Hamilton did on the track, but on what he caused afterwards. Engineers begin to analyze each data at a much deeper level of detail than usual, and that's where the real impact appears. Hamilton's telemetry is not only fast, it's clean, it's consistent, and above all, it's extremely useful for development. This completely changes the workflow within the team, because now Ferrari has a reference capable of accelerating the evolution of the car in a much more efficient way. And this is where Vasseur begins to reveal, without saying it directly, the magnitude of what they have on their hands. Because when he talks about data quality, he's not just talking about numbers, he's talking about Hamilton's ability to translate sensations into applicable technical information. At a time where the SF26 still has areas to understand, this is pure gold. Ferrari not only gains a competitive driver, it gains a development tool that can make a difference compared to its rivals. But this advance has a direct consequence that is beginning to be felt internally, the inevitable comparison with Charles Leclerc. Because while Hamilton accelerates its integration, Leclerc's role begins to be redefined without anyone saying it openly. He is no longer just the driver who leads the project from his knowledge of the car, now he has someone at his side who is reaching that same level, but in record time. This situation generates a silent pressure, one of those that is not seen on cameras or in statements, but that weighs a lot within a team like Ferrari. Leclerc is not being clearly surpassed, but he is seeing his natural advantage of knowledge of the car begin to disappear faster than expected. And in Formula 1, when you lose your main competitive advantage within the same team, everything changes. Meanwhile, Ferrari is also beginning to project this towards the championship. Because what Fiorano reveals is not just an individual improvement, it is a change in the team's overall potential. If Hamilton can already extract this level of the car in specific conditions such as rain, what can happen when the SF26 evolves and reaches circuits where confidence and precision make the difference? This is where the test connects directly with what is to come. Miami. A key point in the calendar, not only because of the updates that Ferrari already has prepared, but because it will be the first real scenario where all this progress can be measured under pressure. And within the team they know it because Fiorano has raised internal expectations. Although externally they continue to play cautiously, Vasseur, aware of all this, adopts an almost calculated posture. It doesn't negate Hamilton's performance, but it doesn't amplify it either. It does not confirm a change in hierarchy, but it does not rule it out either. He walks a fine line, trying to protect the team from a narrative that could destabilize them if it grows too quickly. But precisely this way of communicating is what makes it clear that Ferrari is managing something much bigger than it appears. Because deep down, the true conflict of this act is not technical. It is structural. Ferrari has two drivers capable of leading, but one of them is breaking through with a speed that no one anticipated. And that forces the team to make decisions, even if they are not yet visible. What Fiorano has put on the table is a question that is beginning to resonate within the paddock. Is Ferrari still Leclerc's team, or is it starting to become Hamilton's team? And it is here where everything that began as a simple sign at Fiorano ends up taking shape as a real threat for the rest of the grid, and as a turning point within Ferrari. Because when a team begins to understand that they have something bigger than expected in their hands, the next step is no longer analyzing, it is acting. Ferrari leaves Fiorano with a conclusion that is not said publicly, but that internally begins to consolidate. Hamilton does not need time, he needs a stage. That is the big difference that completely changes the team's approach for what is to come. It is no longer about protecting your adaptation process, but about starting to build around what you can offer now. And this inevitably redefines priorities. At this point, Vasseur's words make even more sense, because his caution is no coincidence. It is a way to buy time while Ferrari decides how to manage a situation that can become as beneficial as it is dangerous. Because having Hamilton performing at this level so soon opens the door to fighting for everything. But it also opens an internal battle that can wear down the team if it is not controlled correctly. And that is where the figure of Leclerc is key again. Because if in the previous act we talked about silent pressure, here that pressure begins to transform into competitive urgency. Leclerc understands perfectly what is happening. He understands that it is no longer enough to be fast, he needs to mark territory. But the most delicate thing is that this reaction cannot be emotional, it has to be perfect, because any mistake in this context can definitively tip the balance. Meanwhile, Ferrari finds itself in a position that few teams know how to handle, having two real leaders in parallel. And this is not theory, it is a reality that Fiorano has confirmed. Hamilton has not arrived to accompany the project. He has arrived to compete within it from the first moment. And that forces us to rethink absolutely everything from strategies to the way in which the car will be developed in the next races. This is where the impact transcends the team and directly hits the entire Formula 1. Because the rivals not only see a competitive Ferrari, they see a Hamilton who feels comfortable again, who has control again, and who is also achieving it ahead of schedule. And in a championship where details make the difference, that timing can be decisive. The question is no longer whether Hamilton will be competitive with Ferrari. The question is how long it will take for him to become the absolute reference within the team. And that doubt is what is beginning to generate concern outside of Maranello, because if the answer is now, then Ferrari is not only in the fight, it may be on the verge of dominating it. Thus, what began as a technical test in Fiorano ends up revealing itself as the origin of a new narrative. One where Hamilton is not the team's future, he is its present. Where Leclerc no longer has an advantage, but has to respond. and where Vasseur, in silence, has to manage one of the most delicate balances of the entire grille. What Ferrari experienced in Fiorano was not simply another test on the calendar. It was the moment in which all the pieces began to fit together in a way that no one expected so soon. Because when you analyze everything together, Hamilton's performance, the team's internal reaction, Vasseur's measured words and Leclerc's inevitable reading, you understand that we are not facing an anecdote, but rather the beginning of a profound change. Hamilton has not only shown that he can adapt to the SF26, he has made it clear that he can lead it. And that is the difference that changes everything. Ferrari is no longer building a future project with him, it is discovering that it can exploit its present now. And in a sport where timing is everything, getting ahead of that process can make the difference between competing or dominating. But at the same time, this new reality opens up a much more complex scenario. Because Leclerc has not disappeared, he has not lowered his level, and he remains one of the most talented drivers on the grid. What has changed is the context. Now he has at his side a Hamilton who is not in the adaptation phase, but in the impact phase. And that turns every race, every qualifying, and every team decision into a potential point of tension. Vasseur knows it. That's why it measures each word, that's why it cools the speech, that's why it avoids feeding a narrative that could grow too quickly. Because Ferrari not only has to manage performance, it has to manage balance. And that balance, as Fiorano has shown, is much more fragile than it seemed. In the end, the great revelation of this test is not in the times, nor in the laps, nor even in the rain. It is in what it revealed. Ferrari has two real paths to victory, but one of them is advancing faster than expected. And when that happens in Formula One, it's no longer just about who has the best car. It's about who is able to control what they have unleashed. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.